Thank you for viewing this presentation. My name is Pedro. I am recently separated from the military after 20 plus years. The subject of this presentation is something that I am very familiar with. I would almost consider myself an expert. After all, I do have a beard. A study in terror. On September 11, 2001, the United States was attacked. With the media frenzy that occurred, the theme was that it finally happened. Terrorism had come to American soil. The theme had a flaw. The World Trade Center had been attacked once before in 1993. But the pervasive theory still remains that terrorism is a modern weapon for change. However, history shows us that the use of terrorism has always been a choice instrument in manipulating international relations.
Before we go rooting through history, we must first figure out what terrorism is. Well, the United States and the U.S. Code defines terrorism in sum and substance as an act that through violence endangers human life for the purpose of intimidating a civilian populace, influence government policy through coercion, or disrupting government process by creating chaos. Webster's definition follows along the same path. We also have to consider the international definition, so we turn to the United Nations, the World Forum for International Relations. Well, they don't really have one. There is no consensus on an international definition. They can only agree on the fact that if terrorists do something bad, it's bad. Even who they should consider a terrorist is widely disputed. So let's discuss the reasons for terrorism. Well, we have already established political motivation, and that would include anything from a change in who is governing to just a change in policy, such as who gets to vote. Another reason is environmental change. Usually it's directed at protecting the environment or animals. And then there is the religious reasons. On the one hand, trying to get freedom to practice, and on the other, for dominance over other religions. But regardless of the stated reasons, the intent is almost always the same: to undo a perceived wrong which ultimately ends up being directed at a governing body. When we apply all this in looking at history, we find some interesting groups. Like in 1773, the American revolutionists in Boston, who dressed up like Indians, boarded British ships, and dumped a bunch of tea into the harbor, inflicting serious damage to British property. This caused the British government to tighten their noose on the colonies. Don't worry, the story ends well. After all, this uprising led to the founding of the United States. As we move forward in history, we find another group called the Irish Republican Army, or IRA. This group has been fighting since around 1848 against the British and Protestants, or the Church of England. The British Crown is no stranger to terror. One of their protectorates, Palestine, can be considered the center for much of the terrorism of today. From the end of the 19th century into the beginning of the 20th century, Jews and Arabs lived in Palestine, and they did not get along. The Zionist Jews and Palestinian Arabs committed acts against each other, as well as the British forces. Eventually, the Zionists gained the upper hand and Israel was born. The Palestinian Arabs were not pleased. They reorganized in 1948 under the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, and continued the struggle. The PLO is most well known for an incident on 6 September 1970, which became known as Skyjack Sunday, in which associates of the PLO hijacked 3 airliners from 3 different countries and landed 2 of them in Jordan at a PLO-controlled airfield. The PLO terrorism design was later adopted by Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda, born in Peshawar, Pakistan in 1988 of the Arabs who helped the Mujahideen defeat the Soviets. Their success left them wanting more, so they adopted some of the PLO ideology and added to it by embarking on a global jihad, or global holy war, basically seeking to make Islam the religion of the world. As is evidenced by 9/11, they did mean the world. Terrorism or revolutions cannot survive in a vacuum. In order to conduct the acts, they require money and support. It is well known that the French provided such support to the American revolutionists. After all, Fayetteville is named after the French general Lafayette. The Soviet Union has made their share of contributions to struggles, both directly and indirectly. They have, of course, supported the first communist state in the Western Hemisphere, Cuba. And Cuba has aided in sowing the seeds of communist revolutions all over the world. Groups such as the Tupac Amaru Revolutionary Movement, or MRTA of Peru, and the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia, or FARC, have made their own marks on the world with Soviet and Cuban assistance. The United States has also supported some struggles. the Mujahideen credit their victory against the Soviets on the Stinger anti-aircraft missiles supplied by the United States, which they effectively used to terrorize the Soviet air power into leaving their ground troops defenseless. The U.S. success in Afghanistan against the Soviets emboldened them to assist other struggles, such as the struggle of the União Nacional para a Independência Total de Angola, or UNITA, against the MPLA, who were in control of Angola following their independence from Portugal. What is most interesting about this is that the MPLA were being supported by the Soviets and Cubans, which makes U.S. involvement more understandable. The Soviet powers, or the superpowers, are not the only ones to blame. Other countries, like some in the Middle East and North Africa, have given to the cause. Iranian shipments of arms and ammunition bound for Al-Qaeda and Taliban insurgents were constantly being interdicted by coalition forces in Afghanistan. The Sudan is where Al-Qaeda moved to following their inception in order to make their connections with money and recruiting sources. Libya also provided safe refuge for training and support for many groups including the Red Brigades and the PLO. Most of these countries claim ignorance due to porous borders, which is hard to believe when you consider the potential gains in their own agendas. The only thing left to ponder is the element of fear. My mom could tell us all day long that she was going to smack us upside the head for something. But it wasn't until we witnessed that first bop that my siblings and I believed. Much the same with terrorism. Although the newspaper was invented in 59 BC, it didn't actually become a common item until the late 17th century. Before that, terrorists had to rely heavily on word of mouth for their deeds to become known, which severely limited the impact. The newspaper, being more common during and after the French Revolution, may have made it easier for the revolutionists to be able to terrorize the countryside to maintain control. But printed words and still images do not compare to moving pictures and audio. The advent of the television opened up the world stage for terrorist acts, which in most instances was free because news media was more than willing to display the scenes over and over. The greatest achievement in technology for terrorism has been the Internet. The Internet gives terrorists the ability to reach everyone from anywhere with their message. Therefore, we can conclude that terrorism has been around for a long time, and because one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, it is difficult to distinguish. Whatever the cause, terrorism is an effective way to make it known around the world. Don't let media's zeal to sell news make you fearful of stepping outside your home. Just be mindful that terrorism exists, and make every day count. Thank you for your time.